Donald Trump's recent visit to the Middle East. Before we take a deep dive into the substance of the trip, is there reason to panic?
The good news is that the United States is perceived now as a strong horse in the region. This administration does not believe in what it calls forever wars. For Israel, if Israel understands or believes that it is in a forever war, that will be a problem.
This episode of Think Twice is sponsored by the Jewish Future Promise, ensuring a vibrant and thriving future for Jews and Israel. Hello, and welcome to Think Twice. This week we have a timely conversation for you with Shoshana Bryen of the Jewish Policy Center about the Trump administration's Middle East policy. But before we start today's program, I want to remind you, as always, to like this video and podcast, subscribe to JNS, and click on the bell for notifications. Also, you still don't have to wait a full week for more of our content. There is a Jonathan Tobin daily podcast where I share more news and analysis with you about the most significant issues we're facing today. You can find the daily show under Jonathan Tobin Daily on the JNS channel, wherever you get your podcasts. And now, today's program. Should supporters of Israel be panicking? President Donald Trump's recent trip to the Middle East, which did not include Israel, gave supporters of the Jewish state some good news and bad news. The good news involved his efforts to expand the Abraham Accords, as well as his continued opposition to Hamas's rule in Gaza, and efforts to free the remaining hostages held by the terrorists there. He was also right to make clear in a policy speech given in Saudi Arabia that he rejected the George W. Bush administration's crusade to impose democracy on the region, as well as the quest to appease Iran on the part of the Obama and Biden administrations. But the bad news involved Trump's embrace of Qatar, the regime that is linked to Iran, Hamas, and the Muslim Brotherhood, and its agenda. The question that supporters of both Trump and Israel need to ask is whether, despite the president having earned the trust of the pro-Israel community, with policies that marked him as the Jewish state's best friend to ever sit in the White House, is he moving away from that stance? Is he truly committed to removing the Iranian nuclear threat and eradicating Hamas? And is the debate going on inside the administration about how to define an American first policy that involves avoiding unnecessary wars, but also projects strength and embraces the cause of allies like Israel, being resolved in favor of maintaining the alliance rather than downgrading it? To answer some of these questions, we're very pleased to have back on the program someone who is one of the most insightful and clear-headed observers of U.S. foreign policy and the U.S.-Israel alliance. Shoshana Bryen is Senior Director of the Jewish Policy Center and editor of inFOCUS Quarterly. She is the former Executive Director and Senior Director for Security Policy at GINSA. She has worked with the Strategic Studies Institute of the U.S. Army War College and the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, and lectured at the National Defense University in Washington. Her work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, The Daily Caller, and JNS, among other outlets. Shoshana Bryen, welcome back to Think Twice.
It's a pleasure, Jonathan.
Shoshana, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. I want to start by asking you to take the temperature not only of the U.S.-Israel alliance, but of the current mindset of American supporters of Israel. President Donald Trump's recent visit to the Middle East sent many in the pro-Israel community out onto the proverbial ledge, leading some to go full doom and gloom about a shift in administration policy or what they perceived as such. Before we take a deep dive into the substance of the trip, is there reason to panic?
Never panic. Never panic. My motto is breathe. And after you breathe, breathe again. Because everything Donald Trump has done so far, domestically and internationally, has been sort of bombshell. And then you wait and you get a better picture.
Yeah, well, I think that's certainly true. So as far as the trip is concerned, what was the good news for Israel and its supporters to come out of this recent trip?
The good news is that the United States is perceived now as a strong horse in the region. People want to be our friend in the region. The Saudis definitely do. UAE always has. And places like Qatar have to think about what to do. Qatar has lost its major strong horse ally in a sense because Iran is retreating. So all of that, it works to the benefit of the United States.
Mhm. Well, that's certainly good news, but how do you see the way the sort of the diplomatic sort of body language, was that something that supporters of Israel should be happy about? There were a lot of specific points that there are points of concern. Sort of, was there more good news beyond the strong horse scenario?
There's always good news when you have an administration that looks at life realistically. The only mention of Israel, there was one single mention of Israel. And it happened also to be the one single time the president told the Arab states what to do. If you notice, everything was an invitation. Join us, work with us, invest with us, be with us, blah, blah. Invitation. The only time he said, you must, is when he said, you must recognize the horror of October 7th that was visited on Israel. It's the only mention of Israel, only mention of you must. And then he went on and he said, look, people of Gaza need a better life, but they're never going to get it under the rule of people who massacre and then rape and do. Okay. So how do I feel about that? Would I have liked him to say, join Israel in this magnificent march to the future? Yes, sure. Would I have liked it if he damned Qatar for a bunch of the things they did and do, and probably would too? Maybe. But the one mention of Israel is the one mention that the Arabs understand. It's a command. And by the way, there is no one in that part of the world that doesn't understand that everything Trump said, good, bad, and otherwise, is a result of Israeli action against Iran. They all know it. He didn't have to say it. So
yeah, I think that's very true. And I think there's always been a basic rule that when Israel is not in the news, that's generally good for Israel. When there are conferences all focused on Israel, it's almost always negative. So I think the fact that Israel wasn't highlighted should not be interpreted as necessarily a bad thing. But so that's some of the good news. What do you think were the main points of concern about the last couple of weeks of American foreign policy?
One you didn't see until, I guess, over the weekend. And that is the United States is very unhappy with the direction of food distribution in Gaza. Okay. And now the French and the British and a whole bunch of other people have jumped on this bandwagon as well. It was always there. If Israel thought it could out-ugly Hamas by withholding food, it was wrong. Israel cannot. Israel has to feed people. Israel is a moral country. Israel cannot make people miserable on purpose. And especially when the United States joins in and says, look, you're making them miserable and Hamas isn't moving. You have to fix this. I think Israel hoped that the Europeans would lean on Hamas and Qatar would lean on Hamas. They didn't. They're all leaning on Israel. And that's not good news. But it's not the result of the trip. It's just
the geostrategic realities of where the war is now.
Yes.
Hamas was sort of speaking of both the move in terms of letting aid in, but they're acting as if their release of the one remaining hostage who was a U.S. citizen, Idan Alexander, that was just a negotiation between the United States and Hamas, and Israel was not part of it. They're treating that as a victory for themselves, that they're recognized players, that there's no need for them to surrender. And certainly the Europeans seem to agree with that. Are you concerned about that?
That's always been the concern, that Hamas doesn't feel the need to surrender because Hamas doesn't care about Palestinians. If they all die in the Gaza Strip, the guys that matter are sitting in a fancy hotel in Qatar. That's all. They never cared. So if you ever believed that the war would end when Hamas cared about Palestinians, you were howling at the moon. I don't know. It was never realistic. So yeah, they feel like they won. They're still in Qatar. They haven't been tossed. They have their money. And now they have the Europeans with them. And that's disgusting.
It is disgusting, but it also leaves the Netanyahu government, the prime minister, with a very difficult choice. He clearly cannot concede the war to Hamas and let them win, survive. But obviously, it's not clear to me, at least, how is the United States going to react to a continued offensive? I mean, we haven't heard Trump or any member of the administration, use the same kind of language that the Biden-Harris administration did, which was always seeking to hamstring Israeli efforts to get them to stop, give up the war. So that's good. But if Hamas is indifferent to Palestinian casualties, as it's always been, and, seemingly a player that other nations are still recognizing, how does Israel win? How does Israel win this war?
I don't know how they win. But by the way, I would point out to you also that the United States is supplying Israel with all the arms it needs. And as you mentioned, the things Biden didn't do, that was one of them. This administration does not believe in what it calls forever wars. It doesn't. And that for Israel, if Israel understands or believes that it is in a forever war, that will be a problem. The president is trying to get the Ukrainians and the Russians on the same page. No forever war.
Mm-hmm. Well, as he's learning, that takes both parties willing to agree to end the war.
Yes.
There's no sign that Hamas is willing to end the war on any terms but its own victory. That's something Israel cannot accept. Saying that this government can ever accept it. So yes, I think you are right in that, the American position, which is widely popular. I mean, most Americans do not believe in forever wars. They were, sobered up, and rightly so, by what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. The United States doesn't need to be involved in that. I've been always, frankly, deeply skeptical of the idea that America should be committed to a forever war in Ukraine, which is not in its interest and distracts it from other more important conflicts, specifically with China. But the Israel situation is different, and that does leave open the possibility that things could be, lead to difficulties with Trump in the next 3 years.
Things could very well lead to difficulties. I don't. No, I believe the Trump administration and President Trump himself, they are pro-Israel people. They are. The forever war thing is a problem for them. The one thing Trump did that I thought was interesting is that he changed the focus in the region from American democracy building, American nation building, the requirement that you have democratic elections. All of this is what led us to forever wars. We went to Afghanistan. We fought. We had to make them a democracy. You're not going to make Afghanistan a democracy. You're not. On the other hand, look at the UAE. That's not us, but this is them. And Trump gave him credit for, as an indigenous sheikhdom, right? Not a democracy. They figured out that the place for them in the world is in the world. So you remember the Mars mission 2 years ago, the UAE Mars mission? Do you know who the chief scientist was? It's a woman. And she wasn't serving coffee. She was the chief scientist. So it is possible to have a modern outlook in the Middle East, in a country that is not a democracy, and it's not. So he offered them ways to look at the world. It was when UAE got to that point that it was willing to talk to Israel. I think Saudi Arabia the same. They haven't talked yet, but the Saudis are waiting to see if Trump is a strong horse and if Israel is a strong horse. So although they have differences in their approach to the region, the United States and Israel both have a belief that some of these people, at least, can work with them. And that's not bad.
Yeah, I think you're honing in on an important point. Trump's policy speech during the trip, I thought, was not as well covered as some other aspects of it. And I think it was very important. And to the extent it was covered, it was heavily criticized because he was, eschewing, the George W. Bush democracy crusade, as well as the Obama appeasement crusade with Iran, saying that America had to choose something else. It wasn't something else that sort of was as grand sounding as, sort of the pro-democracy push, or as, seductive as the idea that Iran could get right with the world, to use Obama's phrase. But it seems much more realistic. And, it is rooted in the reality of the Middle East, which is not one in which, we really share a lot of values with these countries, but we do share some interests. And that seems to me to be a much more solid foundation for a foreign policy than what the United States has tried for the most part in the last 25 years.
We got caught up in the post-Soviet peace dividend and watching the freeing of the Central European countries and the restoration to Europe. And the Atlanticists said, Europe whole and free. And they were right. We got caught up in that. And we thought anybody who was liberated would become, I don't know, Bulgaria or Hungary or Romania. Not true. They have a different outlook on life. And he recognized that in the speech. He was very clear on that. It is much more sustainable for the long run, but you still need to find what your common interests are. That's where the Syria question is very interesting. The guy is a terrorist. There was a bounty on his head by the U.S. government. There's no question that he is ISIS adjacent, he is al-Qaeda adjacent, and now he runs Syria. It's also true that Israel has been talking to him. It's also true that Israel has told him they're going to defend the truce, and he believes that. He wants money. He wants reconstruction. He wants to be powerful in the region. Does that mean he's going to work with Israel? I don't know. If you offer him a chance to do that, he'll either take it or he won't take it. If he takes it, good. If he doesn't take it, you're no worse off than you were before because you already knew that he was all these things you don't like. So is it worthwhile to hand him the possibility? The president did. The Israelis did. Now, let me say this. When the French do it, I don't trust it. I don't need it. I don't want it. The French were the first to capitulate before World War II. Never mind. But if we do it, and if Israel does it, and says, I'd rather have a working relationship with a guy I don't like than worry about where the rest of Assad's chemical weapons are, maybe that's fair. Also true of Qatar, by the way. Offer them something. Offer them a way in. You already know that they're beholden to Iran. They're a small Sunni country next to a big Shiite country. They're nasty people. They're Sunni supremacists. They pay money to terrorists. They do all of these bad things. Offer them a way out. If they take it, good. If they don't take it, you're no worse off than you were last week.
Well, Qatar is something I want to sort of hone in on because I think it's one of the most interesting and in some ways the most disturbing elements of the current situation because it is America's frenemy, if you will, in the Gulf that currently seems to have a seal of approval from the Trump administration. So is there an argument really? And I think you're giving me an outline sort of heading towards there to be made for treating Qatar as a friend, as well as for countenancing the acceptance on the part of the president of a gift that seems more like a bribe and his family's business dealings with Doha. It's been a very one-sided relationship in recent years. Qatar gets away literally with murder, funding Hamas, helping Iran, and the United States has just gone along with it and imposed no real conditions on the relationship. And frankly, I haven't seen any sign that Trump is imposing any conditions on it. How do you feel about where we're heading with Qatar?
Add one more piece to your list of things. We have a base in Qatar.
Right.
And the base is our intelligence point on Iran. So it's not like we're getting nothing. What if Qatar said, take your base and go home? We would have to take our base and go home. We do not want to lose that base. So we are getting...
As if we couldn't put that base somewhere else.
Where? We're going to put it. There's not a lot of space there. There's not a lot of space. And okay. Kuwait has us there. Bahrain has no space. Where are you going to put it? Oman doesn't want us. There's no question about it. Oman doesn't want us. So, and by the way, it would cost us several $1 billion to move it. So, it's not nothing. By the way, this is one of the problems of having dropped out of Afghanistan the way we did. Bagram Air Base was the base from which we watched Chinese nuclear developments. Now we don't have it. So you got to be careful when you sort of flip your finger and say, so they'll throw us out. It's bad for us. We don't have to like Qatar. We want the base. That's number one. Do we like what they do? No. So we offer them something else. Are they going to keep doing what they do? Perhaps, but they do it anyway. But we have the base. It's all a matter for us, as you say, of interests. Now, the airplane. I learned something new today. Do you know how old those airplanes are? 30 years old. Qatar doesn't want them. They've been trying to sell them. They cannot sell them. They're stuck with 2 30-year-old airplanes. So they gift one to Donald Trump. Now, what does it mean to gift? Brings the airplane here. All of this, of course, is because Boeing failed to meet the conditions of a contract for the new Air Force One. Okay, bring the plane here. It is going to cost us a lot of money to reconstruct it, not just the security aspects. It's a 30-year-old airplane. It's probably not going to be done during the Trump administration. He's probably never going to fly on it. Now, so it goes to the U.S. Air Force. So Trump leaves office. He goes back to Mar-a-Lago. Plane stays here. Boeing eventually does make up the contract difference. It gives us new Air Force One. What do you do with the plane? The plane does not belong to Donald Trump. Trump has said the plane will go to the Trump Library. People went nuts, forgetting, perhaps, that Ronald Reagan's Air Force One lives at the Reagan Library. It's not a big deal. Trump and his family have a much nicer airplane. So here again, as far as breathe, folks, it's not like he's handed the president, how much money is that worth? $500 million, whatever it is. Plane that he's going to fly around it. He's not. So
that's a very fair point.
They dumped it off. We got it.
The obviously the imaging of it.
Yes.
Not good.
Would I have taken it? If the president asked me, Mrs. Bryen, should I take the plane? I'd say, you know what? You can do better.
Yeah.
Is it a disaster for the country? No. Does it mean Qatar has bought us? No. Does it mean he's going to fly it? No. Just breathe.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn to Saudi Arabia, which is obviously kind of the linchpin of all of this. Trump made it clear that he wants the kingdom to join the Abraham Accords and normalize relations with Israel.
Yeah.
But despite its good under-the-table relations with Jerusalem and its the closeness with Trump, including the Crown Prince, and even if other countries more countries join the Abraham Accords, do you really think Riyadh doing so is currently a realistic scenario? Aren't they very happy with their current ties with Israel, which doesn't involve them being criticized as the guardians of the holy places of Islam for, appeasing, going into business with the Jews openly? Or, is it realistic to think that this is actually going to happen? Everybody talks as if it will. But there is a case for skepticism about that, isn't there?
So you ask really good questions, Jonathan. I've always known that. If I were the crown, first of all, the crown prince is not the king. So the king will make that determination. The king has always stood for an independent Palestinian state. And he didn't particularly care if it was on top of Israel or next to Israel, but it's the new matter to the king. Palestinian state. MBS, the crown prince, isn't like that. He doesn't like them, the Palestinians. He's cut off most of their money because it was used corruptly. He didn't do it as a favor to Israel. He did it because he doesn't believe in corruption by them. I don't know what corruption goes on in Saudi Arabia. He's much more attuned, as UAE is, and Bahrain, to the modern world and the requirements of the modern world. Saudi Arabia likes the technological capability of Israel. It is hamstrung a little bit, or it certainly was for a while. They also need the United States as a strong horse, because the other thing they don't like is China. And this, by the way, relates to Qatar as well. One of the reasons that President Trump offered Qatar an in is to try to keep the Chinese out. And Qatar appreciates that. I don't know what that will mean in the end, but talk about interest. That is our interest, keep the Chinese out. During the Abraham Accords first period, President Trump was perceived as the strong horse. Trump leaves office, Biden comes in, Biden hates MBS, he makes it clear, he calls him a pariah, he does all of it. And MBS says, the United States is not a strong horse. An individual president might be, but the United States is not, because then they have this other president and he's not. So forget it. President Trump comes back. MBS, if you looked at MBS, not only was he smiling during the entire speech, he was giggling. Why is he giggling? He's so relieved to feel that the United States has a strong horse. He's going to, you know. Would he like to have both worlds? Sure he would. He can get technology from Israel on this side. He does get technology from Israel. The president did mention agriculture in Saudi Arabia. All the agriculture comes from Israeli drip irrigation, you know. But they don't talk about that. So yeah, he'd like to have it both ways. And he will have it both ways as long as he perceives the possibility that the U.S. will fail him again. So it's not just Israel. It's us. One of the things that ties us inextricably to the region and to Israel is that they need us and they don't want China. So he'd like to, maybe he can for a while. Maybe he can't, I don't know. There were Israeli reporters, by the way, in the room. Okay, it's a first.
That was an interesting point. You're absolutely right. We've already discussed Syria, whose leader, a former jihadist, actually got a meeting with Trump where he seemed to be promising the Americans a great deal. You've already said, you know, like that it's not a question of trust, but it's a question of just trying out, seeing where we are. Let me go back to the issue of Hamas and Gaza. Trump came into office pushing for a ceasefire deal with Hamas, which was certainly a good deal for Hamas. Obviously got some of the hostages out, which was obviously something to be cheered, but then quickly transitioned to supporting Israel's war to defeat the terrorists. But are the current negotiations, which are being led by, involved obviously Steve Witkoff, who has not exactly covered himself with glory, you know, throughout these past few months, and who is himself compromised by Qatar in a way that Trump is not. Are we heading inevitably to some sort of deal that will be another lifeline with Hamas?
That's a really good question. I don't think Hamas feels that it needs to make a deal at any level. It doesn't. It will stretch things out. Palestinians will die. I'm sad about that. I am. Hostages will die, and that makes me even more sad. They don't feel the need to negotiate, never mind to reach a deal. They don't feel the need. Now, here's a place where Witkoff, I don't want to say bad things about people, his understanding of the region leaves a lot to be desired.
Okay. Could
I say it any more
damning him by
nicely than
faint praise. Okay, go ahead. I have no problems with saying bad things about people if I think they've done bad things.
I'd rather
you
not.
Go ahead. You've got a different job than I do.
It's true. On my program, I say bad things about people, not on your program. It is possible, however, that if conditions present themselves, Witkoff will be in a position to say to Qatar, you know, give us a hand here, folks. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. I don't know. The biggest hostage exchange was at the first moment. Israel came into Gaza, guns blazing, literally, bombs falling. Hamas said, son of a gun, we got to do something here. And they released 75 hostages, a lot of. Second hostage exchange was in January of 24. Decent size. Same problem, same set of issues. Biden then becomes very, very antsy about all of this. And Biden starts saying, we're cutting off your weapons. Don't do this, don't do that. And all of a sudden, Hamas realizes that the United States can be played as he played the Biden administration. They played them perfectly well. And maybe I'll break my rule about saying bad things about people if I mention former Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was an idiot, who didn't understand he was being ridden. He thought he was being a friend of Israel. Oh, I'm going to solve the war for them. No, doesn't work that way. So Trump comes back in, and one of the things that motivates this administration is not being responsible for other people's wars. It's not the same as endless wars. I don't want to be responsible. He's unhappy about the support we're giving to Ukraine. Not because he doesn't like Ukrainians. I have no idea how he feels about them. He doesn't want it to be our war. So he's trying to end it. India, Pakistan, he didn't want them to have a war. Israel, he says in his head, I think, nobody knows what's in his head. We'll help them by providing the weapon. We are not going to fight the war. We're not going to do it for them. If they want to be responsible for their war, I won't criticize them, and he does not. I will give him the weapons that we've agreed to give him, and he does. But it's not his war, it's their war. So if the Israelis feel that they need more from Trump, I don't know what more they think they can get. He's doing his job. It's not his war. That's the limitation of the administration.
I think that's very fair. Israel has to win the war on its own terms. It can't. Just as the Palestinians keep hoping that the West will hand Israel to them on a silver platter, obviously Israel isn't going to get Hamas handed to them on a silver platter.
That is correct.
The silver platter is the same one. It's the Israeli soldiers, as it was in the famous poem from 1948. That's the security of Israel will have to be delivered by Israel, not by the United States. And now a word about our sponsors. At the heart of the Jewish people is a promise that ensures our traditions, values, and future endure for generations. The Jewish Future Promise is a movement I endorse. It is a moral commitment to securing that future. By signing the promise, we commit to keeping Jewish life vibrant and thriving for the next generation. Join me in shaping the future. Make your promise today. Sign the promise. JewishFuturePromise.org/sign the promise. Another hotspot and kind of a loose end from this trip, which was elsewhere in the region. The Houthis in Yemen continue to pose a threat to Israel, firing drones at the Jewish state. Yet it appears that Trump wanted to opt out of the conflict with an Iranian-backed group that hasn't merely attacked Israel, but attacked international shipping. What does it mean that, that Trump said, okay, our part of that conflict is over? I mean, is it really over? Are the Houthis only going to attack Israel and not shoot at ships?
No, they've already shot at ships.
Right.
If the administration thought that the Houthis were not going to shoot at ships, they were wrong. They were simply wrong. If they feel that Israel should deal with the retaliation for missile attacks on Israel, then he feels that's their right to retaliate, and they will.
And they have.
And they have. And the Sana'a airport will never be the same. The Sana'a airport will never reopen. And you did not hear any criticism of that kind of attack from the United States. And so Israel will continue to do it. By the way, there is still intelligence cooperation. There's a lot of kinds of cooperation that goes on in the Red Sea between Israel and CENTCOM, or Israel is part of CENTCOM. So with their regional counterparts, it's not like he took it away. The cooperation continues. Are we bombing those things? Frankly, we were not having a whole lot of success. Yes, we were taking things out and we were doing a much better job than the Biden administration, which limited retaliatory attacks to the site from which the missile was fired. Okay? And you can do that. You can look backwards and see where it came from, and you could blow up that site. The Trump administration went much farther in taking out capabilities, factories, storage, all that sort of stuff. But the Houthis announced the capitulation, whether it was real or phony, after Israel took out the airport. So the cooperation continues, but Israel will have more success at these things than we did. And the administration was wrong. The war's not over. Shipping has not come back. The German companies that were shipping have said no, they will not go back because they don't trust it to be safe for their ships.
Yeah, well, they still have kind of shut off the freedom of the seas in the Red Sea, which is why we have a U.S. Navy to protect the freedom of the
Well,
seas.
it's a job we agreed to. It's not our job, by the way. It's as part of the global commons, and we accepted the responsibility after the British gave it up. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is there is another country that would like to take over the responsibility for freedom of navigation. There is. It's China. Do we want them to?
Absolutely not, of course.
No, we do not. So we're sort of forced into maintaining this. So it really means that the administration has to make decisions about freedom of navigation. You know, we did the counter-pirate wars in the Indian Oceans. We were very successful at that. We have to decide how far we're going to go on this one because the Red Sea is not free. The Chinese, you know, have a base in Africa, in Djibouti, just north of the U.S. base in Djibouti, which is our only permanent base in Africa. It's 18 miles from the Houthis in Yemen, across the strait. And the Chinese are just north of us. They'd be happy to take over.
That's another concern.
It is another concern.
Another reason why the United States needs to be focused on China.
On China.
And not on other issues. Now, the most important question for Israel, and for those who care about stability in the region, still concerns Iran and the Trump administration's attitude towards Iran and its quest for a nuclear weapon. What do you make of the negotiations that Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, whom you've already mentioned, has been conducting with them, which seems, at least at the moment, and it's hard to read the messages and the signals keep changing, to be willing to accept Tehran's keeping some sort of a nuclear program rather than being forced to dismantle it. As improbable as it seems, are we seeing Trump moving towards accepting a deal with Iran that will have something in common with Obama's dangerous 2015 nuclear accord?
You slid over two important things here.
Okay.
What does it mean to keep a program? And what does it mean to enrich uranium? There are lots of countries in the world with civilian nuclear programs, and the administration the president has been explicit that a civilian nuclear program is not out of reach for Iran. And it shouldn't be, because 99% of the countries that have civilian nuclear programs do not enrich their own uranium. And so it is possible to take out the uranium enrichment and keep the civilian program. That would be our goal. By the way, the Iranians probably need civilian nuclear power, so I'm not even going to talk about that. Enrichment is a no. Witkoff came out and said initially they have to cut back the enrichment. Secretary Rubio said he's not the Secretary of State. And then the president said, no enrichment. Mm-hmm. I think Witkoff heard the point. Now, I would also point out the other thing, and that is that just as it was starting to look like Iran might consider having a serious conversation with the United States and another Iranian hidden plant was discovered and publicized. Who do you suppose found that plant? Who do you suppose exposed that plant? I would suggest Israel.
Yeah, that's a very reasonable supposition.
I know. I try to stay reasonable. Not always. It makes it very hard for the United States to announce that it trusts Iran. And we said that. And that's good, because we don't, and we should.
Yeah, I mean, is any sort of deal with that regime, with its record, with its commitment to, not a civilian, but a military nuclear program, as well as its, still being the leading state sponsor of terror in the world, is there any deal with Iran that could be a good deal? Isn't anything going to, in some ways, winding up to help them? Even if, obviously, it's in America's interest to avoid a conflict, but, can Iran be trusted to abide by any? No. Under the current regime?
No, you know that, because they lied to the IAEA back in 2009, before the Obama push for negotiations, which saw fruit in 2015. So all that time they were lying. They've lied during the JCPOA. They lied after the JCPOA. We know this. They lie. That's it. And now you've got this new plan that they've just discovered. No deal is a safe deal. However, you want to try to keep the focus on it because you don't want it to go much farther. And by the way, they're not ramping up right at the moment. In fact, they've announced that they're going to ramp down as if that's a gift. This is what Saudi Arabia is waiting to see. This is what terrifies Saudi Arabia. Why? Because, as you mentioned earlier, Saudi Arabia is the home of Mecca and Medina. The Iranians want that more than they want anything. The religious side of the Iranians, I mean, the secular side wants power and dead Jews, but the religious side wants Mecca and Medina. And Saudi Arabia lives in terror of that because they could not defend against a nuclear Iran. And they stand, I mean, God forbid, they stand the possibility of losing Mecca and Medina. Remember what Saudi Arabia is. It's the winner of the last war. They fought the Hashemites in the 30s. They won. Now they could have been Hashemite Arabia. It could have been, but it isn't. It's Saudi Arabia. That's the fear. So the administration takes that seriously because they take Saudi Arabia seriously. And they take Israel seriously. They also know that Iran has very little in the way of air defenses. And that if Israel were to choose to bomb something else in Iran, they could. Do we want to bomb Iran? No, we do not. Maybe they're hoping that Israel will take a first step. I don't know.
Yeah, that is a question. Now, I think the question sort of hanging over all of this is this idea that there seems to be a debate going on within the administration about not whether to merely avoid new Middle Eastern wars, but to step back from a tough stand against Iran in nukes and support for terrorism. It kind of was made clear in that in Signalgate when that text stream was made public foolishly, from the National Security Director and all these other people on that conversation, including Vice President Vance, that there was obviously disagreement about where we as a nation, as America, what we should think about Iran and what our attitude should be. Is this, rather than the atmospherics surrounding the recent trip, the real reason to worry about the administration in Israel?
The real reason to worry about the administration is that it is divided between America first and America only. I am a believer in America first, because if we don't take care of ourselves and our capabilities and our borders and our people and nobody else wins. So America first, absolutely. America only is a problem. And you have in this administration people who say, screw them all. They're definitely there. They're not our problem. These are very narrow-minded and short-sighted people, because if you don't have allies, you don't get anywhere. You can't. No one's big enough, even China, no one's big enough to do it without allies and partners. Now, there's a third strain of thinking, which says, if you divide the world into segments, think about it that way. The United States is now responsible for Europe. We put the majority of the money into NATO, majority of the stuff that goes to Ukraine, the majority of the money, the majority of everything, troops. I think England can now send 18,000 soldiers. That's it, max, done. There are people who don't want us to do that. They want the Europeans to do that. They are rich. They are capable. They have to do it. We shouldn't be doing it. Middle East, you have Israel. Support, and they're not saying don't support the Europeans. Israel is our friend and ally in the Middle East. Support them, but let them take care of it. China, the Pacific is the only place where there is no one but us. There is no agglomeration of countries in the Pacific region that can deal with China. Japan cannot, South Korea cannot, the Philippines cannot, Vanuatu cannot, okay? We can. And so those people are pushing for a shift in emphasis to the Pacific region because we are the only ones. It does look like abandoning NATO. It does look like abandoning Israel. I don't believe it is. It's a reconstruction. But Israel has to be extremely careful because sometimes people think it's bigger and stronger and more capable than it is. At the end of the day, And by the way, Israel didn't help its case for being smaller and weaker when it blew up all those guys with pagers. They're obviously more clever than all the rest of us, but it's still a small country. Mm-hmm. And if you think you can just hand off defense of the region to Israel, you cannot. There are some people who want to hand it off to Turkey. That'd be a big mistake. Turkey going down the rabbit hole of Islamic fundamentalism. Erdogan being extremely unpopular in Turkey, but there he is. So you have to watch out for it. But that's what you have in the administration. America first, America only. And then these guys that want to split the difference.
Yeah, I think that's very important to make that distinction. Obviously, Europe can defend itself if it wanted to. It just has relied for the last, 80 years on the United States. I mean, Britain was once a great power. France was once a great power. Neither of them really are, especially Britain. Our nation with more admirals than ships, I believe, currently. Middle East, a little more dicey. Obviously, Israel is strong, but not strong enough to really police the region by itself.
Right.
But I think linked to that discussion and sort of kind of confusing the issue with a lot of people is that, what with this debate going on with the administration is the fact that there is a noisy anti-Israel and sometimes anti-Semitic movement that is growing on the right, even though most of the engine of anti-Semitism in the United States is on the left. That's what we're seeing on college campuses. But there is still, Tucker Carlson, who is a member of the Trump inner circle, being among those platforming anti-Semites and Israel haters. And while to date, he's not someone who has really influenced Trump's policies, is there really reason to worry about him and others on the woke right, for lack of a better term, who seem to have a lot in common with the anti-Semitic left, and that they are influencing this discussion about America first versus America only?
Anti-Semites, as you know, come in all shapes and sizes and colors and forms. And anti-Semitism is not a left-right phenomenon. It's a circular phenomenon. If you go far enough, anywhere, you'll find your opposite number who is also anti-Semitic. So the right's always had them. Tucker Carlson is in America only, except oddly enough, appears to have taken a ton of money from Qatar. So I don't know how you call yourself America only if you're getting paid by foreign interests.
Yeah, going back to that issue of Qatar buying into this country, which, that they've also thrown a lot of money at billions at universities, funding these anti-Israel, anti-Semitic Middle East studies programs.
So don't we have a Congress in this country? Sort of.
Yeah.
So
that's been a question for the last 200 plus years.
Yeah, it is. All right, so let's pretend we have one. And if we have one, isn't it possible to pass a law in this country that forbids Qatar to put its money into American universities that also receive U.S. government money? Is that possible? And by the way, I would do the same thing with Chinese money, because China is buying up research institutions and universities, and that has other implications for somebody else's radio program. But we can pass laws that deal with these things, and we do not. And I'll ask you, what good is your Congress if it can't protect your students? Because the fomentation tank for this is universities. And it has a lot to do with domestic politics. It has a lot to do with foreign politics, but mostly it has to do with money. And I would, do what the French do, chercher l'argent. Oh no, they were chercher la femme. Never mind. Better, they should do that. We could fix some of this, but there's a brilliant book called The Israel Test by George Gilder, and he wrote it in 2009, and he foresaw all of this. And the word intersectional hadn't happened yet, but Gilder explains how the forces, all the forces, and he was focused on the left, but the right has the same forces, come together, and all you have to do is have one of them want something, and it can mobilize all the others. And that's how you got the October 8th anti-Israel riots. How did they get all those people out there 24 hours after October 7th? Because one person made the call, hey, our Hamas friends, our Palestinian friends, they don't call themselves Hamas friends, need our help, get out in the streets. So then you had feminists, you have the LGBTQI plus community, which is the stupidest thing I ever heard, because these are people whose lifestyle is a capital offense in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, and people get killed for being gay in the West Bank and Gaza. But never mind, they're part of the intersections. So they come out and they do all this because it's not one. You're not dealing with one. You're dealing with 10 or 15. And Gilder explains why, and everybody should read the Israel test. We have to stop that in this country. And I don't know if the answer is to cut off university grants to Harvard. I'm not opposed. But I think Congress has to take a broader look at the influences of money that allows these people to sit on college campuses. And if we don't have a Congress, then we should send them home and stop paying for them.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Congress is not going to, is not able to handle that, which is the vacuum that Trump has moved in terms of his actions against anti-Semitism on college campuses. We'll see how that shakes out in the courts, but those regulations, I think, are much needed. We'll see whether somehow executive action can make up for the lack of congressional action.
Well, and by the way, the other way to deal with it is it turns out that the universities haven't all reported their foreign gifts properly. We learned that during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Stronger enforcement of the law, and that's the Justice Department, that's not Congress. Stronger enforcement of existing law would be a big help.
Absolutely. Now, as I started off today with, there was a lot of panic in the pro-Israel movement, criticizing Trump and worrying about what he's doing, what he may do in the coming years. But are those raising those concerns about him now forgetting the alternative? And I guess the what-if scenario that I'd, ask you to play for a moment is, what do you think a Kamala Harris administration would be doing now if she had won in November? And where do you think the Democrats are headed with so much of the party's energy and focus seeming to rest with its left-wing faction headed by Bernie Sanders and the AOC, which is clearly hostile to Israel?
Given our more recent understanding that the Biden administration was not actually run by Joe Biden, but rather by a group of aides and people on the inside, I suspect the Harris administration would have been an extension of Biden because the same aides would have been there. People would have said to her, we're doing great. Just keep these guys. Order pen and everything. So I think you would have seen more of Biden in Harris. She's not any more articulate than he was at his best. So same. But there would have been a lot of support on the Hill among Democrats for more nasty reactions. And then if you look forward, I think you have to look at the firing of David Hogg from the Democratic National Committee as a really important thing. He was meant to be the Gen Z guy, the guy who brings young people into the Democratic Party from the left, at the left. He was certainly the left. He was supposed to bring the young people in. His problem was he tried to get rid of the old people and they revolted and cut his head off. Young people in this country, more than older people in this country, skew to the right. Now, it doesn't mean they skew pro-Israeli, but they skew to the right. After the announcement that DEI and transgender soldiers were going to be dealt with differently in this administration than the prior one, enlistment applications went up vastly. Okay. People were waiting. Young people did not want to go into the military under the other circumstance. They want to go in under this circumstance. The DNC recognized that David Hogg was not bringing those people in. So they canned him. Now, what does it tell you? So you have AOC and Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is flying around in his $50,000 a mile private airplane saying, I can't take United. People are waiting for me. That's the only commercial I would run, and he would be toast. AOC, I think Chuck Schumer would like to knock her off before she knocks him off. Do I want Chuck Schumer where he is? No. Do I want her? No. She has very little support, however, beyond the squad. She put forward, or I guess Rashida put it forward, some nasty anti-Israel resolution of the House. Got 3 votes. 3 votes. That should make you feel a little better. No one wanted to be with them. There are people who don't like Israel. There's no question that in the Democratic Party, they don't care for Israel. but they didn't want to be with her or them because it doesn't play in Peoria. It doesn't play in the middle of the country. There are things that just don't bode well for the far side of the Democratic Party right now. Most Americans would like economic prosperity. They would like lower taxes. This idea of not taxing Social Security, that makes people happy. Not taxing tips. We are, as people, focused on our own lives, not on the foreign policy implications. Focused here. Oh, the other thing was they're trying to get rid of John Fetterman, the Democrats, which is, I would record every instance of this. John Fetterman, when he had his stroke, was very sick. I personally thought it was wrong for his wife to push him to stay in the race. I thought it was cruel. Okay, that was my opinion. But he won, and he came to Congress, and he did okay, and he has to wear sweatshirts. So, yeah, whatever. And the Democrats covered for him. Why should he have to wear a tie? He's fine. He's articulate. No, he wasn't. He is now, but he wasn't. As soon as he gets articulate and he starts defending Israel, now they say, oh, no, he's declining. He shouldn't be a senator.
Yeah. Well,
People
this is more the media wing of the Democratic Party.
People see through it.
Than anything else.
It's not the media wing, in my opinion. It's we don't want him to do this because he's not 100% on our side. And for them, they have to be 100%. Now, I will say, by the way, the Republicans need to look a little across the aisle sometimes too. But Democrats, it's 100% us or it's nothing. Scoop Jackson would not survive in today's Senate. Clifford Case, Jack Javits would not survive because they were strong over here on this and strong over there on that, and they could find meeting places.
Well, our political system as it currently exists, and the two parties have become much more ideological than they were in the heydays of liberal Republicans like Javits and Case, or moderate or really conservative Democrats like Scoop Jackson. They're an extinct species. They're no more in captivity, so that is the way the parties exist. And that's also part of how the two parties sort of exchange identities on Israel over the course of the last half century or more, where the Democrats were once pretty much a lockstep pro-Israel, and now they're deeply divided about it. And the GOP was once divided about it, and now, with the exception of that woke right faction, is pretty much a lockstep pro-Israel party, and that is the current alignment of our politics. It's one that I think many in the pro-Israel movement lament, because they would obviously prefer, to keep alive the old idea of a bipartisan pro-Israel consensus. But I guess my final question for you is that merely aspirational at this point, or is there any chance of preserving it?
At the moment, it's pretty much aspirational in my view. George Washington was very opposed to political parties for exactly this reason. I think he was farsighted. He said eventually people would start to do what the party wants instead of what they know is best for the country. There are glimmers of hope. John Fetterman has been partnering with Katie Britt of Louisiana and Joni Ernst, the biggest budget cutter in the Senate, on various bills, for different kinds of things. So there is some reaching across, and there are some people who still believe in it, but mostly aspirational. You know that old clip of Ronald Reagan sitting with Tip O'Neill and Howard Baker at the theater, and the three of them are laughing hysterically at some comedian? I don't see it happening.
No, well, that's that is all discussions of Ronald Reagan, and those of us who are old enough to remember him, we revere him, but the issues of the 1980s, the politics of the 1980s are gone. Despite worries about the likes of Tucker Carlson, or as well as on the far left, we are living in a different world. And that's something that I think supporters of Israel have to accept.
But if you're going to go there, we've been here longer than any of them. Israel has, the Jewish people have. I just read a book about resilience in Israel after 10/7. And remind yourself occasionally We have come through terrible, terrible times, and we're still here, and Israel is here. And okay.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. Don't give up. We're far from beaten, even when things look dark. Thanks, Shoshana, so much for joining us today and for all your insights. To learn more about the Jewish Policy Center and to read inFOCUS, you can go to jewishpolicycenter.org. We also want to thank our audience. Please remember to tune in every day for Jonathan Tobin Daily Edition. And whether you're listening to us on one of the various podcast platforms or watching us live on Facebook or X or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to JNS, click on the bell for notifications, and give us good reviews. Please write to us at thinktwice@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself, and we'll see you again next week. And thanks again to our sponsors, the Jewish Future Promise. Sign the promise at jewishfuturepromise.org/sign the promise.